my name is Ioana. Today I'm going to do a presentation uh, about eclipses and nodes. I have already done this presentation a few months ago at the Stockholm Astrological Conference, so this is going to be a rerun, but I was just hoping to make it available for the public. So the subject of the talk today will go against some of the things which are the norm in modern astrology, things that I also bumped into when I started learning. And that is the connection of the nodes with the life path. So I thought, which better way to introduce myself to a group of, or to people who are interested in astrology than showing you my chart. So before I begin, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my formal astrology education, just to see how I reached this somewhat controversial conclusion that I'm going to talk about today. I didn't actually get into astrology until very late. It was my mid-20s because I was born in Romania, which is a very, very religious country where the majority is Orthodox, and basically everything else, which is not Catholic, is a sect and it's blasphemous. And despite that, despite that, astrology is still widely accepted somehow, so accepted that we have an astrologer on TV in the morning after the news. Um, Not sure what the logic is there with the rejecting of all other religions but accepting astrology. But the only explanation that I can find is that most believers haven't actually read the Bible. Still, it's quite a difference between that and Scandinavia, where I currently live, where there's like a 50-50% chance that people will think you're crazy if you tell them you're an astrologer. But anyway, I wasn't a fan of organized religion, and I thought most people were very gullible and prone to superstition. And so I categorized astrology in this superstition bin. So I promise this is not a Leo rising monologue. It's all relevant to the point I'm about to make. And so in school, we had religion classes, but they were only about the Orthodox beliefs, which I didn't agree with because I had actually read the Bible due to growing up with a Protestant mother. And I didn't really think that what was in the book fit with what we were doing at all. And I thought that the church was super corrupt and that the priests were pretty much stealing money from people. And so despite this, I didn't only score high in religion classes, but I went to extracurricular contests just to prove to the teachers that I understood the material, but I didn't agree with it. So that was me when I was 12. And fast forward to my mid-20s, when I realized that astrology was not only real, but the converging point of all my interests. As soon as I did my chart, the first thing that drew my attention after the planets were the nodes. So I was thrilled to see that my life path included Jupiter, right? And it totally made sense in Scorpio. So when I started, I did self-study for about a year. I booked a session with an astrologer. I bought a bunch of books. The first one, which was actually Joanna Woolfolk's The Only Astrology Book You'll Ever Need, which turned to have a very misleading title. I needed a lot more books after that. I read a bunch of Stephen Arroyo, and one of my favorites was actually Howard Sasportas. So I was really into the psychological thing, right? I had always been fascinated by psychology and how the human mind works because I have a Scorpio stellium. So I realized pretty fast that it was much more complicated than I initially thought. So I started taking courses because I was a fan of Carl Jung. I found Ren Butler's archetypal astrology course. And if you don't know Ren, He was a student of Richard Tarnas and worked with him and Dr. Stanislav Grof in the 80s with the psychedelic projects. And yeah, I've done some research into that side of astrology, but that's a completely different story. But meanwhile, while taking this course, I had stumbled upon Chris Brennan's work. I read his book, I applied the techniques, and my mind was really blown by the accuracy of things. So I took Chris's course back in 22, which really, really opened my mind to not only to the richness of the history of astrology, but also the depth and the interconnectedness it has had with religion and belief, especially in the classical and pre-classical period, but also how many concepts were invented in the last 2 centuries that stuck a little bit too well. And actually, I did a 45-ish minute talk for the NSOA a few months ago about the history of astrology. If you're interested in that, you can also find it on this channel. So yeah, back to the historical bit, I didn't know, for example, that in Mesopotamia, there were entire colleges of astrologers that sent reports to the kings, or that later in the post-Dark Ages in Europe, you had to actually know astrology to be a surgeon, and all kinds of other interesting historical tidbits they don't really teach you in school. But the most relevant historical thing I learned there was that prior to last century, the nodes were not seen in Western astrology as having something to do with our life path or the things we're supposed to do. In fact, all the ancient texts that we were studying, like Valence or Dorotheus, they don't really mention anything good about the nodes. And actually, they especially warn against putting the moon or the sun with the nodes for elections, which means choosing a right time to start something. So the eclipses themselves, they have been seen as very important and powerful omens, especially in ancient times. And actually, the oldest omens that survive in written form relate to them. So from the letters of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, we even have one fragment that says, a solar eclipse of 2 fingers magnitude took place during the sunrise. There is no apotropaic ritual against it, which was referencing the fact that the Babylonians had all sorts of rituals called Namburbi for counteracting bad omens, including astrological ones. Besides this, they have been recorded in relation to famous events such as the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 between Alexander and the Persians, or the coronation of Emperor Constantine, who also had the great honor of having an eclipse during the famous legalization of Christianity and on the day of his death. Emperor Hirohito of Japan, who was born during eclipse season, he publicized his declaration of humanity on an eclipse in 1946 when he was forced by the Allied powers to admit to being just regular royalty and not divine, like previously thought. In more recent times, President Obama, he was also born during eclipse season. Unfortunately, so was the current president of the United States, whose chart I know everyone is familiar with by this point, and we won't be looking at because he's been getting enough attention. And so yeah, these are just like a few small cherry-picked bits of history's famous figures. So certainly there is this relation between eclipses and power. As far as the text go, in Dorotheus, who was writing in the 1st century, we find an except that says, the eclipse places bring damages to old people. Or an earlier one in a chapter relating to death and illnesses, he specifies that someone with an eclipsed sun in the seventh house will die and people will die with him. All these ancient texts, they were very dramatic, by the way. Um, um, he also wrote that the moon is corrupted when it's with the nodes, but in relation to buying and selling, there is a decrease on the south and an increase on the north. So if we go further in the Western magical tradition, we find different things about them. Like in the first book of the Picatrix, we find a warning saying, beware of performing magic of beneficial effects when the moon is eclipsed. Or in the second book, we find an eclipse affects the sun and the moon and the other planets, and it's likened to the harm done to the other composite bodies. So if you see tips on TikTok about doing magic during eclipses, don't, because the oldest magical texts really warn against doing that. Yeah, so basically there's all sorts of warning in the traditional text. As far as my personal research went, what I could find was that first time it was speculated that they relate to the past and the future in the Western tradition. It was by Dane Rudier in the 1930s, but it didn't really go into the mainstream narrative until Martin Schulman in the 70s, who wrote specifically about the nodes, and he framed them as a past-future direction. And from there on, a bunch of other people kind of just took that and ran with it as default. Then we get people like Jeffrey Wolf Green and Stephen Forrest, and then nobody really questions it onwards. But my personal revelation didn't actually come until I took Austin Kopach's course. If we can call listening to a lecture a revelation. Austin teaches many traditional Western astrology. Um, so he teaches Hellenistic astrology and Islamic era techniques, but he also incorporates the outer planets. However, he's also educated in Vedic astrology, and so he takes some concepts from there. And I would like to add as a background here, Vedic astrology, though it's split in different branches and traditions, it has been having a pretty much uninterrupted practice for a few thousand years, as opposed to what we use here, or like generally use here, with texts that were lost and translated and lost again. So yeah, as some of you might know, Vedic astrology as a rule only uses 9 planets, the 7 traditional we share, and Rahu and Ketu, which we call the lunar nodes. So they consider the lunar nodes as important as the planets. And the name for planets in their tradition is grahas, which means to pull, to grab, to influence. It also means hand. But the 2 nodes, they are their own special category called Chaya Grahas, Chaya meaning shadow. And when I mean shadow, I don't mean it only in the Carl Jung way, where there are things we don't acknowledge, but also in a much more felt sense, like the astronomical manifestation shows us. But to fully understand that, we have to understand their origin story, which there are actually a few variations of, but I will tell you the main idea. So, at the beginning of time, the Devas and Asuras are churning the ocean of milk. The Devas and Asuras are 2 different classes of beings with different characteristics. The Devas are deities, while the Asuras are more self-interested beings, kind of like anti-gods. They're opposed to the devas, but they're not exactly demons. But they're definitely power-seeking. So they are kind of forced together to work together in this churning, which results in the coagulation of many interesting things, like a wish-fulfilling cow, or the goddess Lakshmi, or Dhanvantri, who was the god of medicine and originator of Ayurveda. But most importantly, what comes out of it is Amrita, which was the immortal nectar. So the Devas and Asuras start fighting over who gets to drink the nectar, and the details kind of differ based on the story. But what is certain is that Svarbhanu, a great serpent and one of the Asuras, he disguises himself as a Deva and drinks from it. And it was the sun and the moon who saw through his disguise and told Lord Vishnu, who, as the preserver, cut him in half. But because he had drank from the immortal nectar, his two body parts started functioning independently. The head as Rahu, or the north node, and the tail as Ketu, or the south node. So these two pieces, they were placed beneath the ocean, so they cannot be together, keeping everything in motion and always trying to swallow the sun and the moon. And so only from here we can extract so many things, right? The nodes come from a being which was not of pure intention. Their existence is tied to someone being unfair, but also pretending to be something else. And most importantly, they are enemies of the sun and the moon. And speaking of the luminaries, I think the problem is that as astrologers living in modern times, we have kind of separated ourselves from nature and its cycles, and have abstracted the science a little bit too much. And we're looking at charts and imagining instead of actually seeing the reality of what's happening in the sky, right? Because whether we want it or not, astrology is fundamentally a science of light. Um, it has math and geometry, obviously, but both of those are useless without light. They matter because something is shining, right? So what we're looking at is how light travels through and affects space-time and all the factors which influence this process. So what the nodes are, they are crossing points where the moon's path cuts across the path of the sun as we see it from Earth. Which brings us to what actually happens during an eclipse and what are the nodes from an astronomical perspective. So the moon's orbital path around the Earth is off by around 5 degrees compared to that of the Earth and the Sun. We have this inclination, and the two planes, they intersect when the moon crosses upwards and downwards, and these points of intersection are actually the nodes, which are slowly moving backwards, contrary to the planets, right? Remember, they're placed beneath the ocean, keeping things in motion. And we get eclipses when the moon and the sun cross these points at the same time, making the eclipses an anomaly, which is actually a perfection of the sun-moon-earth system, tied to gravity. So gravitation is one of the factors which bends both light and space-time, right? Important. Mythologically, we have beasts devouring and chasing the sun and the moon all over the earth. It's a very, very old tale, which makes sense because if we really think about it, eclipses are the most dramatic thing to happen in the sky, right? The main light is obscured, light suddenly disappears, And both animal and plant life, they react to these events anxiously. And despite having noticed this strange behavior for centuries and recorded it, humans still chose to make glasses to look at them better, which only goes to prove my point about the whole separation from nature and its cycles. So, the nodes are always churning and moving things in the deep, but since they are a matter of shadow and darkness, they only become truly visible in effect during the biannual eclipse season, when, as a rule, we get one lunar and one solar eclipse per season, one on each end of the nodes, with some exceptions. So it takes a year to have all kinds of eclipses. And a lunar eclipse is quite simply when the Earth moves in front of the sun, and she becomes obscured, so during a full moon, while a solar eclipse is when the moon moves in front of the sun and it goes dark, so a new moon. Um, and this is when the nodes swallow them, right? Uh, and though they are not optically visible everywhere every time they happen, what is certain is that they are interrupting the natural order, which brings obscuration. So it's during eclipse season we get strange things happening, right? The subconscious becomes conscious. We get supernatural phenomena. We get beginnings and endings of great things. We get fights for power, and we get a lot of confusion. Um, so both of the nodes together are a system connecting mind and matter. On the one hand, we have the North Node or Rahu, which is a head without a stomach. It's about hunger, about diving into matter. It really wants to become part of things. It has this very strong pull for embodying and incarnating in whatever area it is in. While on the other hand, we have Ketu, which is the tail, and it's about letting go of things, about the separation of spirit and matter, about disidentification and purification. So basically, we have transformations of the spirit's relationship to matter, going inside with the head or leaving behind with the tail. And we have two different kinds of darkness, one that is given by the absence of light, from going blind because we're going in too deep, which Rahu makes us do. And there is obscuring by separating from that which exists, which is the action of the tail. Austin has a very good metaphor for them as supervillains. He says there's the one who wants to rule the world and the one who wants to destroy it. Um, and that sums it up pretty nicely. Natally, they do show pre-birth karma, but as we know, the whole chart is kind of karmic, right? We are born at the perfect time to learn the lessons our souls must learn, and we're dealt a certain hand, which we can play for better or for worse. It is true, though, that the nodes belong to this layer of the chart that ties us to the past and the future, and also especially to our ancestors. Ketu, in particular, talks about past lives, about heritage, about history, and Rahu shows where we're hungry, or where we want more, and can't be sated, right? And on some level, we're all born because of Rahu, because to come into the incarnate world, we have to have some attachment to things. And so this is where things start getting confusing, because if we look at it from an Eastern perspective, hungering for something and actively working towards the fulfillment of that desire creates more karma, which makes you incarnate again and again, keeping you rolling on the wheel of samsara, right? When the whole point of samsara is to actually neutralize our karmas and achieve moksha, that is enlightenment, liberation, and release from the wheel. So Rahu is important, but it's not the life path. None of the Eastern traditions think of Rahu as Dharma, which means right living, moral responsibilities, and duties. So where will we focus our attention? There will be more Rahu. Where will we try to extract ourselves from attachments? We create separation, which is Ketu. And some evolutionary astrology says that we should dive headfirst with Rahu, but Vedic says that this is the area of life where we're tempted to overdo it. Um, I have some personal theories as to how Rahu came to be seen as the life path, but I'm gonna save that and I'm gonna tell you what I know for certain, and that is in the Indian traditions, they do have the concept of a planet that is the significator of the soul's desires and what the life purpose is and what the homework is in this life, and that's called an Atma Karaka. Atma meaning soul and Karaka meaning significator. And that, as a rule, in most traditions, cannot be one of the nodes. Um, and so to go back to my personal narrative, I didn't stop with Austin's 3-year program. In fact, I'm currently taking some classes with Dr. Robert Svoboda, who is not so much an astrologer. He is an astrologer, but what he actually does is Ayurveda. He's an Ayurvedic physician who is also trained in Jyotisha. So he explains the philosophy behind it, actually relates Rahu to Kama. So karma without the R, which means desire and craving. Kama is that thing which motivates you to go out and drags you in a direction. What Rahu does is it encourages you to go after the thing you want and believe that is the right thing to do. While Ketu is more related to moksha, that is liberation. And there are actually 3 grahas which can help with moksha. There is Jupiter, which makes you read spiritual books and meet spiritual people. There is Saturn, which makes you experience the result of your undesirable karmas. And there is Ketu, whose action is very sudden and often without rationale behind it, where you suddenly get the urge to leave the world behind and go live in a hut in the mountains. Rahu, on the other hand, loves to make people break rules and show off, and it loves having people pay a lot of attention to it. How Dr. Svoboda describes it as a force for frenzy. The metaphor he uses is Rahu takes you to the banks of the river, thinking you have achieved the river, but will not take you across. And his job is to give you a vision which appears to be perfect, but there's almost always an imperfection. Um, because Rahu is not a light, it's a shadow, and it's from the casting of that shadow, from that imperfection, that we will be motivated to seek more. You cannot really satisfy a head without a stomach because the hunger is endless, right? So wherever it is positioned in a chart, it will modify the terrain it is in and it will confuse it. So I was giving personal anecdotes because I was going to give you my chart as the first example. So I have Rahu with Jupiter, and as I told you, I grew up with a parent whose religious inclinations were very much against the norm, right? A bit of an outsider. Also because Rahu has a corrupting influence, I was very aware of the dark side of organized religion. I didn't like the priests. And as you might have noticed, as an adult, I just keep on taking courses. My Jupiter is very hungry for knowledge and it does not know when to stop because it never feels it's enough, right? Um, Also, as a funny side note, Rahu is also connected to knowledge of poisons and pharmacopoeia. And I'm also enrolled in a herbalism course, and I have lots of books on plants and poisons. So it all adds up nicely. There are good things about Rahu, though, despite being a malefic. It's a force that's set on moving forward. Rahu can provide original thoughts and penetrate really deeply into things because it gets obsessed, right? Um, both of the nodes actually give this galaxy brain thinking because they are outsiders. Like Svarbanu was an outsider among the devas. So Rahu's positive characteristics are originality, individuality, independence, insight, ingenuity, imagination, inspiration, in short, creative thinking. But as negative traits, it can give timidity, anxiety, hallucination, confusion, neurosis, delusion, and addiction. And so to control Rahu, we need to have a strong foundation and to be anchored in reality. And so here I would like to give the biggest plot twist of the talk. So we are all living in a Rahuvian world because think about all these things I mentioned, right? Confusion, addiction, anxiety, that's everyone. And the reason for that, as all the studies keep showing us, are the screens. It's the screens, right? We're staring into screens at shadows, which are reflecting reality and painting it in very distorted ways. So the very action of staring into screens, which is funny because that's what we're doing right now, disconnects us from our bodies, right? Our attention, our prana, our energy goes to what we're watching, and it's affected by it whether we want it or not. And so we watch our friends' stories of their idealized lives. Their faces are filtered, right? The angles are perfect. And not only do we keep on scrolling, but we keep spending money on things because the algorithm know exactly what ads to give us. Uh, Sometimes we spend money on shadows, right? On Netflix, on other streaming services. And the more things we have, the more things we want. More uncomfortable plastic clothes that look good in pictures and create this shadow version of ourselves, which is picture perfect, right? And what I personally found hilarious is that in the body, Rahu is related to the nails. So one of the minor remediations you can do is keeping your nails clean and neatly trimmed. And think about what the most widespread trends are on social media, right? It's the filtered faces, it's the fake nails, it's the plumped up lips, right? And I don't mean to attack anyone, but that's the reality we live in. And the reality is that none of it is real. And it's an attempt at distorting reality in the chase for perfection, which never comes because you can always go bigger or shinier, right? So now Ketu's positive qualities are universality, idealism, intuition, compassion, and spirituality. But the negatives are a tendency to anger, irritability, impatience, eccentricity, impulsiveness, which is a little bit like Mars. And they are related. Ketu and Mars are related. Um, but Ketu is not really interested in rational thought. It's more interested in intuitive reality and the non-thinking mind. We can think of Ketu as a disgusted monk, right, who has had enough of the worldly experience and just wants to disentangle the spirit from the body, right? In charts, it often has to do with karmic debt, with weird bad luck in an area of our lives. But it can also show gifts, talents, or understanding that are beyond what is rational, like beyond of something that we have worked on in this life, right? When someone has a innate talent for something. So it is an inheritance in that sense. It can also pull us towards the past, but it's not like the head. It's not like Rahu. It's more like a very heavy object which will attract you towards it because it's deforming space-time, right? And it can attract other objects if they don't resist. So it's indeed about things from the past, about ghosts, sometimes literally, but it also has the power of releasing, like a tail that slaps things away. So during Ketu transits on personal points, we often see people letting go or disidentifying with the things that pertain to that point. It can dissolve blockages and it's very good at this at accepting the pre-existing nature of what is rather than steering and wanting to go in a certain direction because it's headless, right? So it really comes through detachment. A strong note can call someone into doing magic because neither are part of the manifested world. So they deal with knowledge that comes from the outside, from the metaphysical layer of life. And they modify not only the planets that they are with, but also the signs and the houses. And they really confuse that area of life. They bring shadow, they bring mystery, they bring obsession. And they act pretty much like more or less buttons. So we could summarize their influence as Rahu being malefic in terms of spirit and benefic in terms of matter, and Ketu is malefic for matter, for money, for material and societal success, but benefic in terms of spirit, right? So I will show you some charts that will exemplify this pretty well. And to keep in tune with the theme of corrupted religious views, this is the chart of Anton LaVey, who was the founder of the Church of Satan and the author of the Satanic Bible. And don't get me wrong, I think this guy was a clown. I read his Bible when I was a teenager, and I thought, as a 16-year-old, I thought he basically contradicts himself on every other page. Um, but he's a very good example because the whole tenet of his belief is Venus Rahu, right? North node with Venus in Taurus, right next to Mercury. So he's gonna talk about how awesome it is to have sex and only do what you want, always pursuing your desires. Uh, Mercury Rahu is a combination of manipulating with words, with doing shady business, right? And I guess I don't need to explain Venus. Actually, Venus, according to the Vedic tradition, none of the planets like the nodes except Venus, who likes the North Node because they kind of want the same things. Venus wants luxuries and pleasures and more food and more parties and more drinking, and Rahu wants the same. It's just that Venus also usually cares about the other people. Rahu, not so much. And as you can see, the sun is also quite close to this conjunction, and the moon was only 2 days away from being full. So we have another eclipse season baby. And one thing about eclipses is that for them to be considered as one, the alignment of the sun and the moon has to happen within 18 degrees on either side of the nodes. But I think it's generally around 15 degrees that we can actually see them. Um, so his sun is also intertwined with Rahu, which definitely corrupts the solar light, the need to be visible, right? But also the leadership qualities implied. And also the sun has to do with how we're seen in the world, right? And his flavor of Satanism didn't actually imply worshiping Satan like the newspapers like to paint it. It was very scandalous because it had this horned imagery. So he was dressing up as the devil. And he was encouraging people to give in to their desires. And he saw Satan as a symbol of humanity's natural instincts and encourage people to reject traditional religious norms. So there was definitely a distorted image being projected, right? Um, this is the chart of H.P. Lovecraft. And for those of you who are not familiar with him, shame. He was the father of a type of literature which is now called cosmicism. I learned that word doing research for this. So, cosmicism posits that humanity is an insignificant part of the cosmos and can be swept away at any moment by these very powerful, very old beings, which are alive but hidden for the most part until the right time comes for them to resurface, right? Some of which are beneath the ocean, like Cthulhu. So again, we have this is literally the story of the nodes, right? We have these mysterious beings which control from the shadows. And as you can see, not only does he have Rahu in the same sign as the Neptune-Pluto conjunction, which by itself can define the cosmic horrors that come from beyond the solar system, but they are in opposition to his Mars, which is with Ketu. So in Vedic astrology, Mars Rahu combination is actually a curse combination, but Mars Ketu is a little bit different. Mars Ketu gives ghost enemies, the type of enemies that offer no resistance until they offer all the resistance, because Rahu amplifies ego things while Ketu dematerializes the ego, so it doesn't mind losing a few battles to win the war. But because it shows things from the past and is connected to spirits, it can show possession by an angry spirit as well. It has this kind of purgative fire feeling to it. And Lovecraft's work is filled with the references to magic. I mean, all of his work is about magic and the horrors which we can't perceive. And I'm pretty sure if he would have actually tried his hand in magic, he would have been great at it. Um, and yeah, where did he have these combinations? It was in the third and the ninth house, right? So he believed it in the ninth house and he wrote about it in the third house. And actually I found another chart born within a month of Lovecraft, with another ascendant, and that's another writer. It's Agatha Christie, who is not only the greatest mystery writer of all time, but she's the world's best-selling author, whose only rival is Shakespeare. And she has the exact same signature, but in the first house, seventh house, right? So, who are the subjects of her many detective novels? It's mysterious, shadowy people who commit crimes. Um, right, so that's the seventh house. And now to show you an example of Mars Rahu to properly underline the curse quality, the best person I could think of was Mr. Musk, who has Mars with Rahu in Aquarius in the eighth house. So he's actually reaching his nodal return right now. Yay. And there are many ways in which this is funny. So as we can all agree, Mars gives us the competitive spirit, right? And what do we get when we combine that with the more button? It's about making winning more important than anything else, about being cool, about being the best. And on a personal level, it's a pretty tough combination, because it makes someone angry and confused. It really makes a crazy delusion, obsessing haunted mind, right? That goes into action, which sucks for the rest of us. But yeah, remember all the potential dangers of Rahu, like addiction, delusion, and the like, combined with this hunger for power. So not only does Mars rule his 10th house and his midheaven, but it's also in the 8th house. So if we wouldn't know who this person was, we would assume that it's someone who works with technology and has an intense drive for innovation, but wants to be first and doesn't know how to stop, right? And it's also not good with group projects. Because traditionally, malefics in the eighth house struggle with sharing things with other people, especially Mars. And I believe I don't need to explain what this person has done and is doing, both with technology and investments and everything else, just sharing stuff with people, basically. Oh, also, someone pointed this out during the talk I had in Stockholm, and they said, yeah, and Mars also rules their fifth house of children. And what is he also well known for is just spawning a lot, and not taking care of his children. But yeah, so the bottom line is technology is deeply tied to Rahu, actually. And Rahu has co-rulership of Aquarius with Saturn. Rahu doesn't like authority, it doesn't like centralized power. And of course, it's unconventional because it likes everything that is on the fringes. And the interesting part is that both nodes are tied to chemicals, particularly mind-altering drugs. With Rahu in particular is more pharmaceutical, and with Ketu is stuff that disintegrates the ego, right? It's psychedelics, it's jungle juice, this kind of stuff. And one last example, a rather sad one, I'm afraid. This is Marie Curie, um, who had had a Moon Ketu conjunction. So not only did she lose her mother early in her life, an event which totally altered the course of hers because she had to go work and also take care of her sister. But she had notorious bad luck with love, right? The moon in her chart rules the seventh house, and even before meeting Pierre Curie, she had at least one notable romantic entanglement that we know of that changed her life, with the son of one of her employers. And later she did meet Pierre, and it was amazing, and faded and out of this world. Um, but um, he died in a tragic but freakish accident getting hit by a carriage. Um, and of course, Marie's own body was affected by radioactivity, and she died due to complications. The moon being significator for the body in traditional astrology. Yeah, so there are so many interesting things that we notice when we start paying attention to them, to the nodes, both in natal significations, but also in transits. So obviously there are layers and layers of ramifications with transits, with planets, with cycles, with everything, especially with cycles of recurrence. Once we start looking into them, things start getting tied together in strange ways. So, because of their movement, the nodes return to the same signs they are in every 9-ish years. And so we'll have a nodal return around the time we're 18, to the time we're 20, and the second one between 36 and 38. And this is where all the weird karmic fated stuff comes into play. But we also have the reverse, right? We have nodal oppositions where we have weird balancing, corrective equilibrium, in forms of discomfort kind of stuff. So actually, a lot of the people from the 27 Club were not only in a fourth house perfection year, but also in a nodal opposition. Um, yeah. So what I'm saying is not that the nodes are bad or that they don't matter. Actually, quite the opposite. What I'm saying is that they're not a moral compass, and they're not a to-do list for the soul. They are shadow mechanics, right? So they show where something is pulling us forward and where something is trying to detach us. So if astrology is a science of light, then the nodes show us where the light gets interrupted, right? Where something becomes too blinding or where something disappears. So when we see strong nodal activity in a chart, instead of asking, what is this person meant to do, we should ask, where are they hungry? Where are they over identifying? Where is reality being distorted? Because Rahu always promises that the next thing will finally be enough, and Ketu always reminds us that eventually nothing in the material world ever is. And I think that in a world that is increasingly Rahuvian, where we're constantly being pulled outward into consuming, into stimulation and performance and projection, understanding shadow might be one of the most practical things astrology can give us beyond purpose or destiny. Awareness of where we're most likely to lose ourselves can be really illuminating. Thank you. Um, so that was it. Do any of you have any questions? Thank you.